We continue with our look at the Melbourne Cup, and we've gone to one of the foremost experts in his field, and this is Adam Blencowe, racingandsports.com.au. He's the chief analyst there and handicapper as well. Adam, thanks for doing this for us and giving us a benefit of your insight into it. Geez, it looks like a really strong cup this year. What's your take on the strength of the depth of the race?
Yeah, I think it's a really strong cup. I think we probably say that every year. It feels like we get around to saying it's the strongest cup ever, but I think you could probably make a reasonable case for this being that certainly in recent times, and without wanting to get too analytical about it, just off the old vibometer, it feels like a really strong Melbourne Cup. We've got last year's Derby and Oaks winner, we've got a couple of Adelaide Cup winners, so we've got the usual sort of local contingent there, but to have an Epsom Derby winner, to have a horse as good as Very Elegant, and to have a Cox Plate winner, we don't get the Cox Plate winner like maybe we used to in this race before. And then we've got this very dangerous Northern Hemisphere 3-year-old down the bottom. So yeah, I think it's as you say, always a great race, but this year in particular feels like a really hot one.
Okay, yeah, a lot of the mystery in the Melbourne Cup is around those raiders, and you spoke about one of them there being Tiger Moth. Firstly, before we get into the bulk of them, can you just give us how you've assessed Tiger Moth?
Yeah, well, I think he's the horse to beat. To be honest, I think he's really dangerous. He looks to have just been targeted and set up for this race just perfectly. The stable everyone knows the Aidan O'Brien stable are lethal wherever they go in the world, and they tend to, when they put the circle around a race and decide that they want that one, they might not get it the first time, but they tend to, they learn from their mistakes and they tend to get it right. And I think we've seen this little trend in recent years with these Northern Hemisphere 3-year-olds, running through brick walls. We had Cross Counter and Rekindling obviously winning. You could make a case, certainly I would, because I had something on him, for Il Paradiso being unlucky last year. So we're seeing a trend to these Northern Hemisphere 3-year-olds. They get in so well, and I think he's pulled this plan off just perfectly with Tiger Moth. He's held him back a little bit there, but he's done enough just to get him into the race. The betting before the Group 3 that he won on Irish Champions Day last time, said that was the race they were using to shore up his spot. They were there to play. They backed him off the boards, and he just smashed them to absolute pieces. And I think it was a really good piece of form, and you just have to think that there's more to come from him. So in terms of profile, you really won't find a horse that has a better profile than him, other than maybe that little niggle about he's just had 4 starts. So I think I read somewhere he'll be the most lightly tried horse to win the Cup since 1883 or something ridiculous like that. So obviously in that sense he doesn't fit the mould that we're used to, but I think he fits the current trend there. And Aidan O'Brien, he's run second in a Cox Plate, he's run second in a Caulfield Cup, so his horses are going really well here. And there's another little tie in there with him. I think if you calculate the time figure from his win in the 2400 metre race last start, I think Armoury was third in the really deep Irish Champion Stakes on the same card. And I think I couldn't say he was as good as Armoury, or certainly not better than Armoury, but I think he ties in fairly favourably. And as I said, to do that at your 4th start, I think he's about as dangerous as they come down in the weights there.
Can you compare him to, you spoke about Il Paradiso and Cross Counter and Rekindling. How does he compare going into a Melbourne Cup to those horses going into the race?
Yeah, I think he's about as good as Rekindling, but hasn't had as many opportunities as Rekindling. I think he's a bit better than Il Paradiso was in terms of runs on the board. I think Cross Counter was a bit better again. Cross Counter had some really good form when he came down here. So he was really well performed, Cross Counter, and I couldn't tell you that Tiger Moth has got those sort of figures. Cross Counter won at Goodwood and ran a track record there, I think, over 1.5 miles, and it stood up. It was a really fast time. So Cross Counter had big runs on the board. Tiger Moth couldn't quite say that he's got the same, but just 4 starts. And as I said, that profile to me says that we haven't seen anything like the best of him as yet. So I'll be backing Tiger Moth, and it won't necessarily be on what he's produced. Not that I'm knocking what he's produced to date, but it's not so much on what he's produced to date as to what I think he might produce tomorrow.
Yeah, Adam, before we move on to the other Europeans, there is another Northern Hemisphere bred 3-year-old in the race in Russian Camelot. Now, can you give us a line on him through Tiger Moth and again through the precedents that we've seen in the last few years?
Yeah, well, he fits that mould, except that we've raised him ourselves through Danny O'Brien here, and what a fan! I think it's a little bit of one of the stories of the last 12 months has been Danny O'Brien's ability to, with the Raiders coming over here. I think the easy thing is to throw your hands up in the air and say, woe is me. Can we put a stop on it, or can we keep, don't let him come over here, or make him race down here? Whereas Danny O'Brien's decided, if you can't beat him, join him. And he's sort of obviously learned. He's got a great facility there, obviously, and he's decided that he's going to learn from the way these horses are being prepared overseas. And he's having great results, isn't he? And Russian Camelot, I don't think I can remember a better local profiling horse for a Melbourne Cup in a long time. And his campaign had just been going so perfectly for it into that Cox Plate last time. And I must admit, after the Cox Plate, when I first looked at the figures and the way that Cox Plate was run, it was a really brutal test, and they were all out on their feet late. And I thought, oh, that was the first time in his whole career that I thought, wow, is that the run that sort of puts a stop to him and is a bit of a dent in his Melbourne Cup chances? But more I think about it, take my time, walk the dog, stare off into space and have a bit of a think about it. And I wonder, well, he'd had so many slowly run fast home races before that. And the Cox Plate was actually the first time in his whole career that he's run slower late than par. So he's basically been slow, fast his whole career. So there's some chance I would think that run is something that could bring him right on now. Maybe into that scenario. He got smashed up for late speed by Arcadia Queen in a farcically slowly run Caulfield Stakes before that. So maybe he just didn't quite have the grounding for that. And I know that could probably go one of two ways. You know, the big run could just bottom him out, but it could teach him something. He could learn from that. We've seen him learning on the job. He's always been quirky but talented. And yeah, there's part of me in the back of my mind now, the more I think about it, the more I think that big toughen up run in the Cox Plate might just, make a man of him, if you like, and that might be just what he needs going into the Melbourne Cup. And as I said, I'm a big fan of the stable and what they're doing. So yeah, the more I think about Russian Camelot, the more I like.
Okay, you've mentioned the Cox Plate, so let's start with the internationals, being Sir Dragoney and his win in the Cox Plate. How does he measure up?
Yeah, so from a ratings point of view and straight ratings, I'm kind of anchored to him a little bit. I have to like him, and I have to give him a really good chance because he's in so well. He gets that 3 kilo weight swing on Anthony Vandyke from the Derby, which is the easiest line to draw, if you like. And he started favourite to beat Anthony Vandyke that day, and very little separated them in truth. So it's easy to draw that straight line, and then you've got him coming off a Cox Plate, and we don't, as I said earlier, we don't get many Cox Plate winners in the Melbourne Cup anymore. But when we do, we've had Mackay Diva, Saintly, and so you think probably beaten by a better stayer in American, but ran a cracking race all the same to run third. So that in itself demands a lot of respect, I would say. And he did win the Cox Plate with stamina. As I said, they were out on their feet there at the end, and he was still drawing clear his last 200 metres there, especially when you consider that Bossy was waving to the non-existent crowd at the time. He was doing a great job to keep pulling clear. So I spoke to a couple of shrewdies from the UK who were a bit worried about him staying the journey. So that's in the back of my mind there. He emptied out, was the saying at the end of the ledger there, which was over about 2,900 metres. And that was a really well-run 2,900 metres. And it was just his 5th start. So I wouldn't want to pigeonhole. I don't want to pigeonhole him as a wet tracker, even though his 2 big wins have been on wet tracks. And I don't want to say that he can't stay just because of one race at his 5th start at the end of the season. I'd be a little bit forgiving. So I probably have the 2-3-year-olds ahead of him in my thinking, but I'm a ratings man. I'm here as a ratings man, so I do have to sort of give a good push to the horse with the best rating in the race. And when you jiggle it all out for the weights, that's Sir Dragoney. So got to be a chance.
Okay, you spoke about Anthony Vandyke and the clash from those two horses in the Derby at Epsom. What about his first up run in Australia? How did that rate compare to what he'd done previously?
Yeah, it was a pound better than what he'd done in the UK. So a pound here or there probably doesn't matter, but it's at least as good as what he'd done in the UK. And he has a run there earlier in the season where he chased Gaiath, the big blue jacket over in the UK there of Charlie Appleby's, and Gaiath is world class and turned it on that day at Newmarket as well. So Stradivarius back in third, and the rest of them were drop kicked out the back of the telly. So it was a serious Group 1, and he held up really well there. So that to me says he's still got all of his Epsom Derby winning form, and his Caulfield Cup run was terrific. He has been a horse that could throw up a bad one. He did in Hong Kong. He threw up a shocker, but end of season, and that can happen in Hong Kong. He threw up a bad one at Royal Ascot this year. I think they put the soft track down to that one. So he can run a bad race, and my little niggle with him, for as good as he was in the Caulfield Cup, and he was awesome. I think the 1-2 in the Caulfield Cup were a little bit better than the Cox Plate this year, which is rare, but they are weighted as such. And that's the little niggle there with Anthony Vandyke, is that with 58.5, he can only run well. I don't see how he doesn't run a huge race, but there's so many scenarios where he runs even the best run in the race, huge rating, and still gets beaten by these up-and-comers who are just getting those little weight tugs off him. And he just has no wiggle room at all with 58.5. To actually turn a good run into a winning run is going to need a lot of things to go right. He draws well. He's got Hugh Bowman. So, as I said, I think he could only run well, but I can't back them all. So he's probably the one that I'll risk, I think, of the real big dogs in the race.
Okay, outside that, you've got the likes of Ashran, who was good and winning the Hotham on Saturday. You've got Prince of Aaron, who's looking for to improve on his couple of placings in the last two. Dashing Willoughby, who was a little bit disappointing in the Caulfield Cup, and then the Joseph O'Brien pair as well, and Master of Reality and Twilight Payment. How do the remainder of those European horses measure up?
Yeah, well, we know Prince of Aaron really well down here, and his Caulfield Cup run was terrific as well. Not maybe quite as good as Anthony Vandyke. When I talk about his wiggle room, Prince of Aaron's got more wiggle room. He's not as good a horse as Anthony Vandyke, but obviously he's down there at 54.5, which there's a few more scenarios there where he can win it. And I actually really like Barrier 1 for him because I think he's talent-wise, he's probably stretched to the limits, but Barrier 1, it's rocks or diamonds, but with Jamie Carr on there is a chance for diamonds. He could get the right run, and if everything went to plan, his record in Australia is terrific. And I know that he's getting older, but the way he finished in the Caulfield Cup, his closing fractions there were fantastic. So as good as anything he's done in Australia. So he's back in business and must go in as a good chance again. Stratum, I would be staggered if he won. I think if you're siding with Stratum, you can at least say his run at York last time was as good as anything he's ever done on the flat, and his trainer's a genius, so he's got all that going for him. But I would be really surprised if Stratum could win it. And I have to say the same of Dashing Willoughby, who's I think he knuckled early in the Caulfield Cup. It clearly wasn't his run. Like, he's better than that. We all know he's better than that, but 2 miles will suit him better based on his form in the UK, but he's still going to need a big career peak, and it's pretty hard to sit here and confidently tell you that he's about to do that, having essentially been non-competitive there in the Caulfield Cup. So I'd be against him. Master of Reality has a couple of really big runs in the book, including second past the post in this race last year, but my thinking with Master of Reality is that all of his big runs have been really flattering pace-wise. He's got a good racing pattern. He puts himself in there, and I think he overachieves. So I think talent-wise, I'm not convinced about Master of Reality. I think his results are better than his ability. And I think Twilight Payment is a slightly better horse than him. And I think his form in Ireland would suggest that Twilight Payment's probably got a length or two on Master of Reality and is a better horse. And I must say, Twilight Payment, I wouldn't think he could win Twilight Payment. He's getting on in years and things, but he's had a fantastic season and run a couple of really good figures in the UK. So I think he fits the mould of, I don't think he can win, but I would be surprised if he didn't run top 10 Twilight Payment. I think he'll probably overachieve because I think he's going really, really well.
Okay, Adam, you've deciphered that mystifying form for many of us from Europe. Now measure it up in the context of the 2020 Melbourne Cup. How are you seeing this race?
Yeah, so I'm siding with Tiger Moth. I think Tiger Moth is the horse that they have to beat, and I just love the profile. As I said, I think they've set this up. They've put the ducks in a row, and I think they're ready to knock him down. And I actually like that he drew wide as well, because I think it just keeps him out of the scrimmage. And when I looked at the way this map presents as well, there's a lot of horses drawn low that are, I think, because they've drawn low, they're likely to try and use that and hold their spot. But I think the real leaders are drawn wider. So I think there might be a bit of a squeeze up coming past the winning post the first time there. I think it could get a little bit busy. And in that scenario, with a cool-headed rider who's no stranger to, he's won 3 Melbourne Cups, Karen. He's won a couple, 2, 3 Everests. Like when the money's on the line, Karen's a cool head, and I think he's the right man to not get too worried. Just let him find his flow there, Tiger Moth. I think they'd be happy to sit just off midfield and be happy to be 3 deep and chiming in at the right time. And yeah, I can't see too many scenarios where he doesn't run a big race, Tiger Moth. So I'm siding with him. As I said, Russian Camelot was the other one. I think. Yeah. I wavered. I must admit, I wavered after the Cox Plate, but I'm coming back around. The more I think about it, the more I think that, as I said, the real making a man of him in the Cox Plate there. I'm happy to gamble on that and gamble on the good stable that I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing from them over the last 12 to 18 months. So I sort of hope that this project works for them as well, because I think it deserves to be rewarded because they've done so well with him. And I think the best blowout in the race, well, again, he probably fits the mould. I'd be surprised if he won, but another horse that I really like him as a horse and think he can run well as a real blowout at big odds is Steel Prince, who ran pretty well in the race last year after having a couple of setbacks. It just didn't go to plan for him, but he'd been terrific when he won the Ramsden. It was a terrific Ramsden when he beat Surprise Baby. Thrilling race that. They stayed really well and ran a big rating that day to get his ticket into last year's Cup. Didn't quite work out for him, but I think this spring he's been building. He's run behind Order of the Garter, returned a really fast figure. He was good then, probably the best of all in the Bart Cummings, and then won the Geelong Cup and won it really well. So he's going to have to run to a clear new career peak, obviously, and he's got a little bit of work to do. And he's 50-1, so I'm not saying he's a good thing by any stretch, but he's a really likeable horse, Steel Prince, and I really like the way that he's tracking. So I think he'll run a big race at big odds as well. He'd be the real blowout for me.
Okay, you've given it to us now as a way that you've thought things through. What about on the raw figures? Who came out on top with just the numbers?
The numbers man is Sir Dragoney off that Cox Plate. And when you consider that Cox Plate rating and the way he's weighted there with the 3 kilo pull from the top, and it's probably not quite as good as Anthony Vandyke. As I said, the 1-2 in the Caulfield Cup managed to, in my mind anyway, and in our ratings, were a little bit better than the Cox Plate this year, which is rare. But they're weighted like it, and that gives Sir Dragoney the edge. So he is the ratings horse. So I am having to make a little case away from Sir Dragoney to say, well, wet track and maybe he doesn't stay, which is probably unfair. And I don't like to pigeonhole horses like that, because I think we're too quick to horse wins on a wet track and we pigeonhole them and say, well, you're a wet tracker, or horse doesn't stay one time and we say, well, you don't stay. I think that's unfair, and he must be a great chance. He's certainly the ratings horse for sure, yeah.
Okay, Adam, really appreciate you breaking it down for us and giving us the benefit of your insight, and hopefully you have a successful Melbourne Cup day yourself.
Fingers across. Thanks, Adrian.